The Great Hall of the Vel-3 High Council was a wonder of alien engineering. Crystal pillars rose from the floor like frozen lightning, and the walls glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The chamber floated in orbit around the gas giant Desser Prime, and through the transparent ceiling, the swirling storms of the massive planet painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Supreme. Commander Zoreth stood at the center of the hall. He was tall, even by Vel-3 standards, standing nearly 8 feet when he stretched to his full height. His skin was the color of storm clouds, smooth and scaled. His 4 arms moved with practiced grace as he addressed the assembled delegates. His eyes, large and black like pools of ink, swept across the gathered council members with obvious satisfaction. "The humans have given their answer," he announced. His voice was a series of clicks and whistles that his translator implant converted into the common galactic tongue. "They refuse to surrender their colony worlds in the Orion Arm. They have chosen to fight." A murmur rippled through the council. Some delegates shifted nervously on their hovering platforms, while others leaned forward with hungry anticipation. The Vel-3 Dominion had conquered 17 civilizations across the galaxy. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed entire star systems, and built an empire that spanned thousands of light years. The idea that a young species like humanity could stand against them seemed almost laughable. Ambassador Kreth was the oldest member of the diplomatic corps. His scales had faded to a pale gray with age, and he moved slowly, but his mind remained sharp. He had spent decades studying other species, learning their cultures and their weaknesses. He had also spent considerable time studying humanity, and what he had learned troubled him deeply. Supreme Commander Kreth said, his voice thin but steady. "Perhaps we should reconsider this course of action. The intelligence reports from the Monitoring Division suggest that humans are more dangerous than they appear." Zoreth turned to face the old ambassador. His expression, as much as a Vel-3 face could show expression, was one of contempt. "Dangerous? These creatures have barely been traveling between stars for 300 years. They still fight among themselves. Their planet is divided into competing nations that cannot agree on anything. What threat could they possibly pose to the Dominion?" "They are survivors," Kreth said quietly. "Their homeworld tried to kill them many times. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, diseases that wiped out millions. And yet they are still here. They are still growing. Every species survives its homeworld." Zoroth dismissed with a wave of his upper left arm. "That is hardly impressive." "Not like this," Kreth insisted. "Humans do not simply survive. They adapt. They overcome. They take whatever tries to destroy them, and they turn it into a tool for their own advancement. I have studied their history, Supreme Commander. They are not like the other species we have conquered." But Zoroth was not interested in warnings. He had built his career on victory, and he saw no reason why this campaign would be any different. The Dominion's fleet outnumbered humanity's military vessels by a factor of 10. Their technology was centuries more advanced. Their soldiers were trained from birth for combat. The war would be swift, decisive, and glorious. 3 days later, the formal declaration of war was transmitted across all communication frequencies to Earth and its colonies. On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the Pacific Command bunker hummed with activity. The facility had been built during the early days of human space exploration. Designed to withstand anything from nuclear strikes to asteroid impacts, its walls were reinforced with materials that could stop a tank round, and its communication systems could reach any point in human-controlled space. Admiral Catherine Price sat in her office when the transmission arrived. She was 53 years old, with dark hair that had begun to show streaks of gray and eyes that carried the weight of 3 decades of military service. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, put down a rebellion on Mars, and negotiated treaties with species that had been exploring the stars when humanity was still living in caves. She had seen much in her career, but she had never seen an official declaration of war from an alien empire. She read the transmission twice, her face showing no emotion. Then she looked up at her aide, Lieutenant Danny Ortiz, a young man barely out of the academy who had been assigned to her staff just 6 months ago. Get me President Holloway on a secure line, she said calmly, and wake up the Joint Chiefs. All of them. Danny hesitated. Ma'am, it's 3 a.m. Catherine's eyes met his, and something in her gaze made the young lieutenant stand straighter. I'm aware of the time, Lieutenant. Tell them the Velthari just made the worst mistake in galactic history. While Danny rushed to make the calls, Catherine stood and walked to the window that looked out over the command center below. Dozens of officers were already at their stations, their faces lit by the glow of their screens. The news was spreading. Within hours, every human in the galaxy would know that war had come. Catherine thought about her father, who had served in the Pacific Fleet before her. She thought about her grandmother, who had been a combat medic in one of Earth's many conflicts. She thought about all the generations of her family who had worn uniforms and carried weapons and fought for causes they believed in. The Velthari thought they were declaring war on a young and inexperienced species. They were wrong. Humanity had been at war in one form or another for its entire existence. They had fought each other with stones and spears, with swords and guns, with bombs and drones. They had refined the art of killing over thousands of years, and now someone else wanted to step into the ring. On the colony world of New Taipei, located in a star system called Kepler 442, a man named Marcus Webb was working late in his workshop. He was an engineer, 34 years old, with calloused hands and a mind that never stopped solving problems. His workshop was filled with half-finished projects. From agricultural drones to water purification systems, the emergency broadcast interrupted his music. And Marcus listened to the declaration of war with growing disbelief. When it finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his workbench and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a young woman in a military uniform, her expression serious but proud. His great-great-grandmother had served in the Marine Corps back on Earth. Long before humanity had ever dreamed of reaching the stars, Marcus looked at the photograph. Then at the agricultural drone on his workbench. He was not a soldier. He was an engineer, a builder, a creator of useful things. But his grandmother had taught him something important when he was young. She had told him that every human carried within them the potential for violence. It was not something to be ashamed of or to hide from. It was simply part of who they were. The key was to control it, to channel it, to use it only when necessary. It seemed that the time for necessity had come, while Marcus said to the empty workshop, "Here we go again." Across human space, similar scenes played out in millions of homes and workplaces. Parents looked at their children and thought about the future. Veterans dusted off old uniforms and checked weapons they had hoped never to use again. Young people who had never known war began to understand that their lives were about to change forever. The Velthari had awakened something they did not understand. They had poked a creature they thought was sleeping and found it very much awake, and very angry. The Velthari war planners had done their calculations carefully. They had counted human ships, measured human industrial output, and estimated human military strength. According to their projections, the war would last 6 standard months. The human colonies would fall one by one, and eventually Earth itself would have no choice but to surrender. What the Velthari failed to understand was that their calculations were based on the wrong assumptions. They had conquered 17 civilizations, and in every case, the pattern had been the same. Destroy the military, capture the government, and the population would submit. It was simple, logical, and efficient. Humans did not work that way. The first battle took place in the Tau Ceti system, home to a small human colony of approximately 12,000 people. Velthari Admiral Nexith commanded a fleet of 40 warships, more than enough to overwhelm the handful of patrol vessels assigned to protect the colony. He expected the engagement to last a few hours at most. He was wrong when his fleet arrived in the system. Nexith immediately noticed something strange. The colony's small garrison of 3 military ships was nowhere to be found. Instead, his sensors detected dozens of civilian vessels moving in unpredictable patterns throughout the asteroid field that surrounded the colony world. "What are they doing?" Nexith asked his tactical officer, before anyone could answer. The first shots were fired. The mining ship had been designed to break apart asteroids for processing. Its cutting lasers were meant to slice through rock, not warships. But the colonists had modified the vessel in the 72 hours since the declaration of war, boosting the laser's power output and improving its targeting systems. The beam cut through the shields of a Velthari escort vessel and sliced it in half. Return fire, Nexus shouted, but his ships were already under attack from multiple directions. Cargo haulers launched improvised missiles made from mining explosives. Passenger shuttles rammed into his warships on suicide courses, their pilots ejecting at the last moment and trusting their spacesuits to protect them from the debris. The battle lasted 11 days. The colonists fought from every position imaginable. They used the asteroids as cover, hiding their ships in craters and launching surprise attacks. They set traps in the wreckage of destroyed vessels. They broadcast false signals to confuse Velthari sensors. They did everything that military training said they should not do, and it worked. When Nexus finally secured the colony, he had lost 23 ships and over 40,000 soldiers. The human defenders had numbered 8,000, including teenagers and elderly colonists who had insisted on fighting. Not one of them had surrendered. Nexus stood in the ruined colony command center, surrounded by the bodies of humans who had fought to the last. An old woman lay near the main console, a weapon still clutched in her cold fingers. She had been shot 3 times, but the expression on her face was not one of fear or pain. She was smiling. "What kind of species is this?" Nexus whispered. He would not live to find the answer. A booby trap, hidden beneath the command console, detonated 3 seconds later, killing him and his entire command staff. The colonists had rigged it during their final hours, knowing they would not survive but determined to take as many of the enemy with them as possible. Back on Earth, Admiral Catherine Price studied the reports from Tau Ceti with grim satisfaction. The colony had fallen, yes, but the cost to the Velthari had been staggering. If every human world fought with the same determination, the war would bankrupt the Dominion within a year. She stood before the United Nations Emergency Assembly, a gathering of leaders from every nation on Earth. The old rivalries and conflicts that had divided humanity for centuries had been set aside in the face of the alien threat. For the first time in human history, the entire species was united by a common enemy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice echoing through the great hall, "our ancestors survived ice ages. They survived plagues that killed half of their populations. They survived world wars that burned cities to ash. They crossed oceans in wooden ships, not knowing what waited on the other side. They walked on the moon using computers weaker than the phone in your pocket." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "The Velthari think they understand war. They have conquered species that surrendered after losing their first battles, species that collapsed when their governments fell. They have never faced an enemy like us. They have never faced a species that does not know how to give up." President Gregory Holloway stepped forward. He was a former Marine, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that showed the scars of combat experience. "What do you need, Admiral?" Catherine's answer was simple. "Everything. Every ship we can build. Every weapon we can manufacture. Every person who is willing to fight. The Velthari have declared war on humanity, and we are going to show them what that means." On the occupied colony of Haven's Rest, the Velthari learned another hard lesson about human nature. Governor Desic had been given the task of establishing order on the conquered world. He had experience with subjugated populations, having served as an administrator on 3 other worlds absorbed by the Dominion. He expected the humans to be difficult at first, but he was confident they would eventually accept their new reality. He was very, very wrong. The resistance began within hours of the occupation. A Velthari patrol was ambushed on the outskirts of the main city. All 12 soldiers were killed, their weapons taken, their bodies left as a message. The SEC responded by imposing a curfew and executing suspected rebels. The attacks increased. Supply depots were sabotaged. Communication towers were destroyed. Velthari officers were assassinated in their sleep. The humans struck without warning from directions that made no sense and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Desic could not understand it. The humans had no central command structure, no organized military force, no clear leadership, and yet they fought with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. He did not realize that this was how humans had always fought. They did not need a general to tell them what to do. They simply saw the enemy, and they attacked. Farmers who had never held a weapon learned to shoot in days. Teachers who had spent their lives in classrooms became demolition experts. Children as young as 10 served as scouts and messengers, slipping through Velthari checkpoints with vital information. One incident haunted Desic more than any other. His soldiers had captured an elderly woman suspected of hiding weapons in her basement. When they searched her home, they found enough explosives to destroy an entire city block. The woman was 93 years old. She had 17 grandchildren. She had been prepared to die to protect them. When the soldiers brought her before Desic, she did not beg for mercy. She did not plead for her life. She looked at him with eyes full of contempt and said something that his translator rendered as, "You have no idea what you have started." They executed her the next morning. She laughed as they shot her. Desic sent a report to the High Council that night. "The humans are not soldiers," he wrote. "They are something else. Something worse. Every single one of them is a combatant. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an entire species." The report was filed and forgotten. Supreme Commander Zorath remained confident in victory. He would learn the truth soon enough. In the factories of Earth and its remaining colonies, humanity began to build. Shipyards that had produced civilian vessels were converted to military production. Mining operations increased their output to feed the hungry furnaces of war. Scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons, new defenses, new ways to kill the enemy, and the people trained. Young and old, rich and poor, they learned to fight. They practiced with weapons they had never used before. They studied tactics and strategy. They prepared themselves for the battles to come. The Velthari had awakened a sleeping giant. Now they would face the consequences. 6 months into the war, the Velthari Dominion controlled 12 of humanity's 47 colony worlds. By any normal measure, they were winning. Their territory had expanded, their flag flew over human cities, and their soldiers patrolled human streets. But the numbers told a different story. In those 6 months, the Dominion had lost over 800 warships. Nearly 2 million soldiers had died, been wounded, or gone missing. Their supply lines stretched across hundreds of light years, and those supply lines were bleeding. The Ghost fleet was responsible for much of that bleeding. Lieutenant Commander Samantha Brooks had been a cargo pilot before the war. She had spent 15 years hauling freight between colonies, learning every shortcut and hiding spot in human space. When the war began, she had volunteered for a new program that took experienced civilian pilots and put them in command of military vessels. Her ship was called the Quiet Fury. It was a stealth destroyer, built to be invisible to enemy sensors. Its hull was coated with materials that absorbed radar, and its engines ran so quiet that a Velthari ship could pass within 1,000 kilometers without detecting it. Samantha and her crew were hunters. They lurked in the darkness between stars, waiting for Velthari convoys to pass. Then they struck like wolves, taking down prey. "Target acquired," said Ensign Howard Grant from his position at the sensor station. He was young, barely 22, but he had already earned 3 commendations for his work. Velthari Supply Convoy. 12 transport ships, 4 escorts. Samantha studied the tactical display. The transports were carrying ammunition and replacement parts for the occupied worlds. Without those supplies, the Velthari occupation forces would slowly starve. "They're running minimal security," she observed. Commander Victor Reyes, her executive officer, nodded. He was older than Samantha by a decade, a former naval officer who had served in the Mars insurrection. "Intelligence says they're stretched thin. Too many raids, not enough ships to protect everything." "Then let's give them another reason to worry." Samantha activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, battle stations. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we disappear. No heroics, no extended engagements. In and out in 5 minutes." The attack began with a torpedo spread that caught the escort ships by surprise. 3 of them were destroyed in the opening salvo. The 4th tried to turn and fight, but Samantha had already positioned her ship behind an asteroid that masked her exact location. "Fire on the transports," she ordered. "Priority targets are ammunition carriers." The Quiet Fury's weapons tore through the convoy. In 4 minutes, 3 transports were destroyed and 2 more were crippled beyond repair. The surviving Velthari ships scattered in panic, broadcasting distress signals that would take hours to reach reinforcements. "Break off," Samantha commanded. "Take us into the asteroid field." The Quiet Fury slipped away into the darkness, leaving behind burning wreckage and dying soldiers. By the time Velthari rescue ships arrived, Samantha and her crew were already planning their next attack. "One convoy at a time," Victor said as he plotted their escape route. "Exactly," Samantha replied. "They want a war of attrition? Let's see who bleeds out first." Across human space, 36 other ships, just like the Quiet Fury, were doing same thing. They hit convoys, raided supply depots, and attacked isolated outposts. They never stayed long enough for the Velthari to catch them, and they never struck the same place twice. The effect on Velthari. Morale was devastating. Soldiers on occupied worlds began to suffer from shortages. Ammunition ran low. Medical supplies became scarce. Food that should have arrived in days took weeks. And always in the back of their minds was the knowledge that human ships were out there in the darkness, waiting, on the Velthari homeworld. The High Council began to feel the pressure. "Our economy is suffering," the Elder of Commerce reported. "Trade with our subject species has declined by 40%. They see our struggles against the humans, and they begin to wonder if the Dominion is as strong as they believed. Our shipyards are working at maximum capacity," the Elder of Industry added. "We are producing new vessels faster than ever before. But we are also losing them faster than ever before. The humans are replacing their losses. We are not." Supreme Commander Zorith refused to accept these warnings. "The humans are nearly broken," he insisted. "Their colonies are falling. Their military is outmatched. One more push, and they will collapse." Ambassador Kreth, who had tried to warn them before the war began, sat silently in his corner. He had given up trying to convince his colleagues of the truth. They would learn it themselves, in time. On the occupied world of Haven's Rest, Governor Thesic finally achieved a small victory. His soldiers captured a human resistance leader named Laura Chen. She was 38 years old. A former school teacher who had become one of the most wanted figures on the planet, Thesic interrogated her personally. He wanted to understand how the humans coordinated their attacks without any visible command structure. He wanted to know where they got their weapons, their explosives, their intelligence about Velthari movements. Laura sat in the interrogation room with her hands bound, looking at the alien governor with calm eyes. She was thin from months of hiding and fighting, but her spirit was unbroken. "You want to know our secret?" she said. "There is no secret. We just hate you. Every single one of us hates you with everything we have. And as long as one of us is alive, we will keep fighting." Thesic leaned forward. "That is not a strategy. That is emotion." "You're right," Laura agreed. "But here's the thing about humans. Emotion is what keeps us going when logic says we should give up. Logic said we should surrender after you took our first colony. Logic says we're outmatched and outgunned. But we don't care about logic. We care about freedom. We care about our families. We care about making you pay for every drop of blood you've spilled." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You can kill me. You can kill 100 of us, 1,000 of us. It won't matter. For every one of us you kill, 2 more will pick up weapons. For every city you burn, 10 more fighters will join the resistance. You can't kill an idea, Governor. And right now, the idea of destroying your precious dominion is spreading through humanity like wildfire." Sec executed her the next morning. Within a week, 3 more resistance leaders had emerged to take her place. Back on Earth, Admiral Catherine Price stood before a map of the galaxy. The war had reached a turning point. The Velthari advance had stalled. Their supply lines were stretched to breaking. Their soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and increasingly afraid. "We've survived the first wave," Catherine told her staff. "Now it's time to push back." Marcus Webb, the engineer from New Taipei, who had escaped the occupation, presented his latest creation. It was a new torpedo design based on captured Velthari technology, but improved with human engineering. "We call it the Hornet," he said. "It's faster than anything they have, and its guidance system is impossible to jam." "How many can we produce?" Catherine asked. "With full industrial capacity, about 2,000 per month." Catherine shook her head. "Make it 5,000. We're going on the offensive. And when we hit them, I want them to feel it." The tide of the war was about to turn. The Velthari had spent 6 months learning what humans could do when defending their homes. Now they would learn what humans could do when they went on the attack. It would be a lesson they would never forget. 1 year into the war, the Great Hall of the Velthari High Council was no longer a place of confidence and pride. The crystal pillars still rose from the floor. The walls still glowed with soft blue light, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Supreme Commander Zoreth stood at the center of the hall. But this time, he was not delivering victory speeches. He was facing judgment. The Elder of Commerce spoke first, his voice sharp with anger. "You promised us victory in 6 months. 6 months. It has been 12 and we are losing. Our trade routes are in ruins. Our shipyards cannot keep pace with our losses. 3 of our subject species have launched rebellions inspired by human propaganda broadcasts." The Elder of Science stepped forward. "The humans were supposed to be technologically inferior. Instead, they have reverse-engineered our shield technology and improved upon it. They have developed weapons we have never seen. They adapt faster than any species in our history." Zorth tried to defend himself. "The humans are resilient, yes, but they are still outnumbered. Their colonies continue to fall. We have killed millions of them." "And lost millions of our own," the Elder of Military Affairs interrupted. "Our soldiers no longer want to fight. They have seen what happens on occupied human worlds. They have heard the stories of ambushes and suicide attacks and traps. Many of them would rather face execution than be deployed to human territory." Ambassador Kreth, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. His voice was old and tired, but it carried across the hall with clarity. "I warned you," he said. "Before this war began, I told you what the humans were capable of. I told you they were different from every other species we had conquered. You did not listen." Zorov turned on him with fury in his eyes. "Then tell us, Ambassador. What are they? What makes them so impossible to defeat?" Kreth rose slowly from his seat. He was ancient by Velthari standards, his scales faded and his movements stiff, but his mind was still sharp. "They are survivors," he said. "Their planet tried to kill them with ice and fire and disease. They killed each other in wars beyond counting. And they are still here, still fighting, still building. They do not know how to surrender, Supreme Commander. It is not in their nature." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have studied their history. Do you know what makes them truly terrifying? They do not fight to conquer. They fight because they refuse to die. Every other species we have defeated eventually accepted their fate. They looked at our superior numbers, our superior technology, our superior resources, and they concluded that resistance was pointless." Kreth shook his head. "Humans do not think that way. They look at impossible odds and see a challenge. They look at certain death and find reasons to fight anyway. They would rather burn their own worlds than let us have the. That is what we are facing. Not an army, not a government, but an entire species that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees." The hall fell silent. For the first time, the members of the High Council truly understood the nature of their enemy. Far from lesser prime, the human counteroffensive was gathering strength. Admiral Catherine Price commanded the attack on the Nexer system, a major Velthari logistics hub. Her fleet had grown from the handful of ships that had defended Earth at the start of the war to over 200 vessels. Armed with the latest human weapons and crewed by soldiers who had been fighting for 12 months, All ships. Report status, Catherine ordered from the bridge of her flagship. The carrier Unity, one by one, the captains of her fleet confirmed they were ready. Samantha Brooks, now promoted to captain, commanded a squadron of stealth destroyers. Marcus Webb had left his engineering work to serve as a technical officer aboard one of the new battlecruisers. Thousands of humans who had never imagined themselves as warriors now wore uniforms and carried weapons. The Velthary Defense Fleet is holding position near the orbital stations. Lieutenant Danny Ortiz reported from his sensor console. Approximately 60 vessels, mostly cruisers and destroyers. Catherine studied the tactical display. The Velthary formation was defensive, cautious. They were no longer the confident invaders who had swept into human space a year ago. They were afraid. Good, Catherine thought. They should be. Signal the fleet, she commanded. Standard attack pattern. Destroyers will engage their escorts while the main force targets their supply stations. I want those facilities destroyed, not captured. We're not here to occupy. We're here to hurt them. The battle lasted for hours. The human fleet cut through the Velthary defenders like a blade through flesh. The new Hornet torpedoes performed exactly as Marcus had promised, evading every countermeasure the Velthary tried. Human pilots trained in simulators that recreated Velthary tactics, anticipated enemy movements before they happened. When it was over, the Nexer system was in flames. 43 Velthary warships had been destroyed or disabled. Every supply station, every warehouse, every logistics facility had been reduced to debris. Catherine allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before moving on to the next target. On the occupied human worlds, the news of the victory spread quickly through resistance networks. The Velthary tried to suppress it. But humans had always been skilled at hiding information and passing messages. Governor Vesic, still struggling to maintain control of Haven's Rest, watched his soldiers' morale collapse. Desertion rates skyrocketed. Velthary officers who had once been confident and aggressive now jumped at shadows and refused to patrol without heavy escort. We need reinforcements, the Essex reported to the High Council. The humans smell blood. They are becoming bolder every day. The reinforcements never came. There were none to spare. Across the galaxy, the subject species of the Velthary Dominion watched the war with growing interest. The Kralith, who had been conquered 3 centuries ago, remembered their own failed rebellion. The Asari, who had submitted peacefully to avoid destruction, wondered if they had made the right choice. The Vendix, the newest addition to the Dominion, openly discussed the possibility of uprising. Human agents moved among them, spreading propaganda and offering support. They were not there to recruit soldiers or forge alliances, at least not yet. They were there to plant an idea. The idea was simple. The Velthary are not invincible. In a secret meeting on a Kralith world, a human operative named Daniel Foster met with leaders of the local resistance movement. They were taking an enormous risk. If the Velthary discovered the meeting, everyone present would be executed. Why should we trust you? The Kralith leader asked. Her name was difficult for human tongues to pronounce, so Daniel simply called her Speaker. The Dominion has ruled us for 300 years. Your species has been spacefaring for 3 centuries. What can you offer us? Daniel smiled. We offer you proof that the Dominion can be defeated. We offer you weapons, training, and intelligence. But most importantly, we offer you something the Velthary never gave you. And what is that? Hope. Daniel leaned forward. The Velthary conquered you because they convinced you that resistance was pointless. They made you believe that their power was absolute and eternal. We're here to show you that they were lying. They can be hurt. They can be beaten. And when we finish with them, they will never threaten anyone again. Speaker studied the human for a long moment. Her species was not known for emotional displays, but Daniel thought he saw something like hope flickering in her compound eyes. Show us, she said finally. Prove that what you say is true. Watch the news from the war front, Daniel replied. Every day, we're pushing them back. Every day we're getting stronger while they get weaker. And when the time comes, when their empire starts to crumble, you'll have a choice to make. He stood and prepared to leave. The Dominion has ruled this galaxy for thousands of years. They believe they will rule for thousands more. But they made one mistake that will cost them everything. What mistake? Daniel's smile turned cold. They picked a fight with humanity, and we don't know how to lose. Within 6 months, the Kralith Resistance had launched its first major operation in 3 centuries. The Asari began sabotaging Velthari facilities on their homeworld. The Vendics openly revolted, tying down Dominion forces that were desperately needed on the human front. The Velthari Empire, which had seemed so mighty and eternal, was beginning to crack, and humanity was just getting started. 18 months after the declaration of war, the Velthari High Council sent a message to Earth requesting a ceasefire. They used diplomatic language, speaking of mutual interests and peaceful resolution. But everyone knew what the message really meant. The Dominion was begging for mercy. President Gregory Holloway chose to respond personally. His message was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching not only the Velthari, but every species in the galaxy. It was carefully crafted to deliver a very specific message. "You came to our worlds and killed our people," Holloway said, looking directly into the camera. "You burned our cities. You murdered civilians, children, the elderly. You thought we would break. You thought we would surrender. You thought wrong." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold as space itself. "We do not want your surrender. We want you to understand. Every species in this galaxy is watching this war. Let them see what happens when you threaten humanity. Let them understand that we are not sheep to be slaughtered. We are the wolves." The final campaign began 3 days later. Human fleets, now numbering over 200 ships, pushed into Velthari space. They did not burn cities or massacre civilians. They were not interested in revenge. They were interested in liberation. Every world the Dominion had conquered over centuries of expansion rose up as human forces approached. The Kralith attacked Velthari garrisons with weapons supplied by human agents. The Asari sabotaged planetary defenses, opening holes for human landing forces. The Vendics provided intelligence on Velthari fleet movements, allowing human commanders to anticipate every defensive maneuver. The Dominion's empire, built on fear and maintained by force, crumbled in weeks. Admiral Catherine Price commanded the assault on Nesser Prime, the Velthari homeworld. Her flagship, the carrier Unity, led a fleet that included ships from 12 different human nations. They had come together, despite centuries of their own conflicts, to face a common enemy. The Velthari fleet is forming a defensive perimeter around the planet, Lieutenant Danny Ortiz reported. Approximately 200 vessels. They're pulling everything they have left for this fight. Catherine studied the tactical display. The Velthari fleet was larger than hers, but that no longer mattered. Human technology had caught up and surpassed Velthari weapons. Human pilots had learned to fight in ways the Velthari could not counter. Human soldiers had proven their worth on 100 battlefields. "Signal the fleet," Catherine ordered. Standard assault formation. Stealth destroyers will hit their flanks while the main force engages head-on. I want their fleet broken before we reach orbital range. Captain Samantha Brooks led the stealth destroyer squadron. Her ship, the Quiet Fury, had survived dozens of engagements and earned a reputation that made Velthari commanders nervous whenever it was sighted. "Target the command ships," Samantha ordered her squadron. "Cut the head off the snake, and the body will die." The battle was fierce but short. The Velthari fought with the desperation of those who knew they were facing destruction, but desperation was not enough. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, each captain knowing exactly what to do without waiting for orders. They had practiced these maneuvers 1,000 times in simulation. Now they executed them flawlessly. Within 3 hours, the Velthari fleet was in full retreat. Half their ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled toward the planet's surface, abandoning any attempt to prevent the human landing. "Signal the Velthari flagship," Catherine commanded. "Tell them we are prepared to accept unconditional surrender. Their civilian population will not be harmed. Their culture will be preserved. But their military will be dismantled, their subject species freed, and they will pay reparations for every colony they touched." The surrender came within the hour. Supreme Commander Zorith, who had started this war with such confidence, was brought before Catherine in chains. He looked nothing like the proud warrior who had addressed the High Council 18 months ago. His scales were dull, his eyes empty, his spirit broken. Catherine looked at him without hatred. She had seen too much death to waste energy on anger. "You could have left us alone," she said. "We were not interested in your empire. We just wanted to explore, to build, to live in peace. But you had to prove you were stronger. You had to show the galaxy that no one could stand against the mighty Velthari Dominion." Zorath did not respond. There was nothing he could say. "Now the galaxy knows the truth," Catherine continued. "The Dominion was never as strong as it pretended to be. And humanity is far more dangerous than anyone imagined." She turned away from the defeated commander. "Take him to the holding cells. He will face trial for war crimes along with the rest of the High Council." In the aftermath of the war, Ambassador Kreth requested an audience with President Holloway. The old Velthari was granted permission to visit Earth, where he met the human leader in a garden outside the presidential residence. Kreth moved slowly, his age weighing heavily on him. He had tried to prevent this war, and he had failed. He wanted to understand the species that had brought his empire to its knees. "I tried to warn them," he said. "I studied your species for decades. I saw what you were capable of. Then why didn't they listen?" Holloway asked. H made a sound that his translator rendered as a bitter laugh. "Because you looked weak. You fought among yourselves. Your world was divided into competing nations. You wasted resources on petty conflicts. Every civilization we conquered was unified, orderly, logical. You were chaos." Holloway nodded. "That's what you saw. Chaos." "Yes. You want to know what that chaos actually was?" Kreth tilted his head, a gesture of curiosity. "Practice," Holloway said simply. "Thousands of years of practice. We have been fighting each other since before we had written language. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy you threw at us, we had already invented, used, countered, and refined. Your species conquered peaceful civilizations who had evolved past conflict. We never did. We just got better at it." He stood and offered his hand, a human gesture Kreth had learned to recognize. "The war is over, Ambassador. But let this be a lesson to the galaxy. Humanity wants peace. We truly do. But if someone forces us to fight, we will remind the universe why we survived when so many others did not." Kreth took the offered hand. "I believe," he said slowly, "that lesson has been thoroughly learned." 5 years after the war ended, the Galactic Council welcomed humanity as a full member. Representatives from dozens of species watched the human delegates enter the Great Assembly Hall. Some watched with respect, others with wariness, but all understood that the galaxy had changed forever. On the colony world of New Taipei, now rebuilt and thriving, Marcus Webb stood before a memorial wall bearing the names of those lost in the war. His own mother's name was carved into the stone, killed during the Velthari occupation. His daughter tugged at his sleeve. She was 6 years old, born after the war ended, growing up in a galaxy that knew to respect her species. "Daddy, what did they think would happen?" Marcus looked down at her, his heart full of love and sadness. "They thought we were weak, sweetheart. They saw a young species and assumed we were easy prey. We were not. No." He picked her up and held her close. "We never have been." Above them, ships moved through the stars, human ships, trading and exploring and building. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity's message was clear to anyone who cared to listen. We come in peace. We prefer peace. But if you mistake our kindness for weakness, if you threaten our families and our worlds, then you will discover something that countless enemies throughout history have learned too late. Humanity does not know how to quit. That makes us the most dangerous species alive. The stars stretched out endlessly above New Taipei, filled with possibilities and promise. Somewhere out there, other young species were taking their first steps into the cosmos. They would learn about humanity, about the war, about what happened when the Velthari underestimated the strange creatures from a small blue planet, and perhaps, just perhaps, they would be wise enough to learn from that mistake. Marcus carried his daughter home as the sun set over the colony. The war was over. The future was bright. And humanity would face it the same way they had faced every challenge in their history together, unbroken, undefeated, always.